You recording?
Yep.
And we back.
And we back.
On y'all. All right. How did we come up with this topic?
So, Memorial Day's coming up, and people be throwing around Black people started it. Because when me and you were talking about it, I was like, yo, didn't Black people start that? He was like,
yeah, I mean, it was like a meme going around. It was just like the real starters of it were Black people.
Yeah, and
I ran with it. I mean, I didn't fact check it.
Right. So it's like, well, let's actually fact check this.
Right.
So, I mean, as far as we're concerned, it's just the holiday for barbecues, getting drunk, day off from work, and, everybody returning to wearing all white. Niggas with they all white parties.
Their white Kangos on.
They linens. They K-Swisses. Ew.
Right.
Ew. But no, so pretty much we learned that many different states claim to be the birthplace of the holiday, but it wasn't until 2009 that it was discovered that former slaves did create Memorial Day. So it is, I guess, recent news. So that's probably why, that's not probably why we never heard of it, because they wouldn't have told us that anyway.
Nah.
But, that's why it's becoming more present now to see this information. Okay. So you went into more detail about the actual event than I did. So if you will, please.
All right, I'll take it from here. So Union General John Logan is often credited with founding Memorial Day, and he pretty much just made an announcement that it's Decoration Day. That's what it was called back then. And today, like you were saying, multiple states, North and South, claim credit for establishing the holiday, from like Georgia to Virginia to Illinois, all over the place. However, during the spring of 1865, African Americans in Charleston, South Carolina, former slaves for the most part, held a series of memorials and rituals to honor the dead to honor the dead of Union soldiers and celebrate the struggle against slavery. Now, this was a very large event on the 1st of May that year.
10,000 people?
Yeah, 10,000 folk.
It's a lot.
Yeah, and it was, air quotes, forgotten until a historian at Yale named David Blight found records of it in Harvard's archives.
All right, Brother Blight.
All right, holla at your boy, man. During the final year of the war, the Confederate Army converted a race course and jockey club into an outdoor prison holding Union captives. Now, Union means North, Confederate means South.
Yes.
Probably get that out the way.
Yes.
The conditions of it were so bad. 257 died of disease and were buried in mass graves. So they was just dumping bodies in a big old hole. Right. And when they had to evacuate, when the Confederate Army had to evacuate, Charleston Black workmen actually dug up the bodies. They came across it. They dug up the bodies and gave the soldiers proper burials. And they built a high fence around the cemetery and put the words at the entrance, Martyrs of the Race Course.
Right. Can I say?
Go ahead.
So pretty much just to clarify, the bodies that were there, these are bodies of Northern soldiers that were captured by the Southern soldiers. So They were keeping them in a prison war camp. That's the one he was talking about with the racetrack. So they were holding them there, and when they died, they pretty much just dumped them all into this mass grave. So the people down there are the ones who, the Blacks that were starting the Memorial Day or the Decoration Day event, they dug those bodies up and gave them proper burial. Just to clarify, because this part really confused me for a second. I'm like, wait, whose bodies were they? Why were they there? But okay, keep going.
All right. So what would follow after they dug the bodies up was a parade with about 10,000 people, like newly free people in cooperation with white missionaries and teachers. You had 3,000 black school children carrying armloads of roses and singing the Union March song, John Brown's Body, right? So it's funny because maybe about a week before we decided on this topic, I'm on Instagram and I came across a post from Killer Mike the rapper, and he was saluting a man named John Brown. And then for one of the first things I come across is John Brown's Body being sung by these school children, these black school children. So maybe I had to look up John Brown. So John Brown was an American abolitionist, and he pretty much just believed in let me put that out there, a white American abolitionist
right,
who believed in violence is the only way to overthrow the institution of slavery in the United States. Yeah. So a little background on him, he at 12 years old, he was traveling through Michigan and he witnessed an African American boy being beaten, and it just haunted him for years. So it kind of formed something in him.
Right.
That made him want to really get involved and really see. He saw the problems with slavery and just how inhumane it was. Mm-hmm. So he worked on the Underground Railroad. He met with Frederick Douglass in 1847 in Springfield, Massachusetts. Then in 1849, he moved and settled in a black community in North Elba, New York.
Okay.
Right? He went and moved to the hood. You know what I mean?
For the people.
Right. So as I was saying before, he believed in using violence to end slavery, and he actually became involved in a conflict. In 1856, he and several of his men killed 5 pro-slavery settlers in retaliation of an attack on, I'm probably going to butcher this word, but it's Potawatomi Creek, right? And another thing I found a quote.
Potawatomi.
Right.
Keep going.
So another thing I saw is a quote, and he pretty much he wasn't in agreement with a lot of the other abolitionists, and he said these men are all talk and what is needed is action. So my man John Brown was about that action, you know.
So y'all ain't about that action.
Yeah, y'all ain't about that action, right?
Popping them gums, but you ain't about that action.
So another shut up. So another note that he had in 1858, he actually liberated a group of enslaved people from Missouri and helped guide them to freedom in Canada. And it was also in Canada that Brown spoke of plans to form a free black community in the mountains of Maryland and Virginia.
Yeah, see, there's so much with this topic because I did come across something like that. I saw this woman talking about her ancestors and how they had a little settlement up in the mountains, and her great grandfather was one of the last blacks from the Civil War era still living up in the mountains. I'm just like, what? I mean, it's something I definitely want to look into more later, but this topic goes in so many different directions. Oh my gosh.
For sure.
But yeah.
All right, so more on Brown. In October of 1859, he led a party of 21 men on a raid of the Federal Armory in Harper's Ferry, Virginia, now West Virginia. So he held dozens of men hostage with the plan of inspiring a slave rebellion.
Oh, shit.
Right? So Brown's forces held out for 2 days. Mm-hmm. They were eventually captured, and he went to trial quick as hell. And November 2nd, he was sentenced to death. So he's actually executed on November 2nd, he was sentenced to death. And then on December 2nd, he was executed. So his grave is actually still in North Elba, New York, near Lake Placid. And it was declared a National Historic Landmark in 1998. So John Brown's Farm Estate Historic Site. It's been managed since 1896. The grounds are still open to the public, and you could take tours of this place in the warmer months. But
wow.
So that's a little bit on him.
The things that we learn, huh?
Right. The more
that's
you know.
very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, by the way, yeah, we're kind of teaching each other
because
we didn't fully exchange notes on this topic because it was so broad. So
yeah,
very interesting, Zay. Thanks.
Yeah, no problem.
Oh my god.
So back to the actual event.
Yeah. Oh, I want to say too,
go ahead.
The soldiers, the Union soldiers that were dug up, they weren't all black or all white. It was a mixture. And they celebrated them no matter what because they felt like they were fighting for their freedom. So they just celebrated them all collectively.
Yeah. All right. So back to the actual event of 10,000 people. Yeah, 10,000 people that were forgotten, you know.
Right.
You had several hundred black women with flowers, wreaths, and crosses, and you had black men marching. You had the black children chorus. They were singing rally around the flag and the Star Spangled Banner. You had Negro spirituals. I'm pretty sure. I still say it.
They did specify that it was Negro spirituals, but he's like, they was Negro spirituals, right?
It's absolutely that, according to me.
What else they gonna be, right?
Right. They ain't the only one that can make up history, right? So then they had ministers read from the Bible.
Okay.
All right. Then after there was a parade, the crowd dispersed into the infield of the actual track. Remember, this is at a jockey track, like a horse racing track. And they enjoyed picnics, speeches, and watched soldiers there. So, you know, they was out there. I mean, that's pretty much where you get it from. We eat good on there.
Makes sense.
They probably dancing, holding hands. It's probably the first electric slide. You know what I mean? Like,
right. And that was as soon as the war was over too. So they were really celebrating.
Yeah.
And
it was devastating.
Pretty much their freedom was beginning to finally be concrete, especially in the South.
Yeah.
So they was partying, party up.
Right. So whatever they was doing, the wobble.
Hey, wobble, baby, wobble. You playing games right now.
Right.
You're playing games.
But imagine that. But I thought it was interesting though. Just a side note, you know, you had black children singing "We'll Rally Around the Flag" and the Star Spangled Banner, and just imagine that. You know, that's some patriotism shown after all this. And I was curious. I wonder if they sung the full version of the Star Spangled Banner, because you know we don't acknowledge the full version. The full version actually says some real racist stuff. But anyway, so if you fast forward to modern day, in 1966, President Lyndon B. Johnson declared Waterloo, New York, the birthplace of Memorial Day. For whatever reason, I don't know. But
it's gonna be here,
right? It's gonna be here, right? So then, in 1971, Congress established Memorial Day as a federal holiday. These dates were used. Yeah, right. That's like 30 years ago. No, it's not 30 years ago. Why do I treat 2000? Yeah, I treat like 2000 as the marker.
Almost 50, right? Isn't that crazy? We almost in 2020, nigga.
Shut up. All right, so those dates used in conjunction to the original Union General John Logan that we were speaking on before are kind of used against crediting the stuff that happened in Charleston, you know. And then eventually the race course that was the site of the celebration was eventually named after a Confederate general who became South Carolina's governor right after the war. After the war. So from there, you know, every year in Charleston, as I was doing the research, the reenactors come together. And they come together, right? And they come together, they come together and they honor a Confederate General Stonewall. And yeah.
No, there was Stonewall where I grew up too. Remember I was telling you about the fight at Bull Run?
Oh, yes, that's right.
And then there's Stonewall right next to my old neighborhood as well. Virginia all up in this mess.
Yeah, Virginia backwards.
Right in the middle.
Right?
Right in the middle of everything.
But I never understood this reenactment thing, you know what I mean? Like,
right.
Like seriously, like how scary is it that like Confederate ideology is so strong? It's so strong that from 1865 they reenact losing every year. Like, every year they get together and they lose. They schedule a L every year.
Yeah, so it's like, how do they end it? Like,
I
I
don't
mean, they
know.
did win some battles, so maybe they picked the ones that they won
Yeah,
to reenact.
that's some revisionist history for you. It's like,
Right? We just gonna skip over that part. That's like when I watched Lion King and I like to, skip over the part when Mufasa dies. It didn't happen.
yeah, pretty much. But like, I just imagine some hillbilly like, oh, this year gonna be different, Jasper.
Right?
We gonna get. I'm telling you, it just feels different this year. We gonna get them Yanks.
Yep. Yep.
You know what I'm saying?
We will
But
not secede to the Union.
right,
No.
all right. So, back to the prison camps. The prison camps. Tell us more about this.
Oh, wait. Before the prison camps, though, I
What's
wanted
up?
to say real quick that the Memorial Day practices were not initially even like practiced by the Southerners because they didn't feel compelled to spend a day decorating the graves of their former enemies.
Yeah, they lost.
They
The
can't be
losers.
they can't be humble. So I mean, it's like, but over time, Northerners they started decorating the graves of both sides as a form of reconciliation. So it's like the Southerners, like, y'all could have still decorated your own. I get whatever. Like, so damn stubborn.
Right.
But yes, back to these Civil War prison camps. I was like, when I saw that initially, when they say they dug the bodies of the 257 people, I was like, wait a minute. Like, wait, what? And what's up with these prison camps? Like, why were these even there? Like,
In
what is going
existence,
on?
yeah.
Yeah, like, what is going on? So pretty much, and the prison camps are really the cause of there being these massive grave sites littered all throughout the North and the South, because there's tons of them that have been discovered and that are still, I don't want to say tons, but it's a good amount that are still there because it's just, they have to find a place to put all these bodies.
Mm-hmm.
And even in my research from other wars too, there's mass graves from, like, I think the Revolutionary War, there's a mass grave in Washington Square Park in Philadelphia.
Oh, wow.
Like right there on 7th and Walnut. I was like, ooh.
Well,
It's just, it's full of like, yeah, it's full of old soldiers and a bunch of slaves. Like, okay. Good to know. But anyway, back to the prison camps while they were there. So when the North or the South caught a troop from the opposite side, so whenever a Northerner caught a Southerner, they would pretty much put like hold on. So they had this parole system of where they could exchange the captured troops and then continue on fighting. So it's like, I got one of your men, you got one of mine. All right, I'll give them back. Yeah, because they knew that their side was being captured too, so they would hold on to them. So in the meantime, before they could find somebody to trade them with, instead of just killing them or whatever, in some instances they would have them in these camps that were of course supposed to be temporary. But once more blacks started joining the war, the exchange system just broke down completely in the mid 1863. Now, this is like barely a year after blacks were even able to legally join the military. And it's already like, as soon as we get involved, like, yeah, they can't be fair anymore. You know what I'm saying? Because they were still being fair with each other, even though they were fighting. So it's like the Southerners refused to treat captured black prisoners as equal to white prisoners. So then they were pretty much on both sides. It just started, the bodies started piling up in these prison camps. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. It's just stupid. Like, couldn't just keep going on with the program. No, not at all.
Not at all. And it's all because they didn't want to treat us equally, even if it was to their own detriment. You know what I'm saying? They still had to deal with the bodies.
And then too, I'm pretty sure like the Southerners that caught black Union troops probably wanted to keep them down south for their own benefit and because they didn't want them to continue going back up north to be free. That could have been a part of it as well, why they didn't want to exchange. It's like, oh, no, got our contraband back. Like they got a piece of property back right there. So many men ended up dying in these prison camps from starvation, disease, and basically living in tents or holes because most of the camps were outside. So I was reading accounts where people were literally digging holes to sit inside, especially in the north, even in the south too, it gets cold in some parts, just to try to protect themselves from the elements. But so basically all these people were dying out. Most of them, it seems like they died in these camps and not even in battle. So that's where these mass graves were beginning to start appearing to accommodate all these bodies. And typically, on opposing sides, the enemy that died in battle would typically be thrown into the mass grave. I mean, especially blacks on either side. They just throwing them in mass graves no matter what. And if one of your own died, they would bury them honorably. So if your enemy died, you just kind of toss them all, you know what I'm saying, into the same pit. And then you take your own and put them, put their name on them and stuff so that they can be accounted for. So it's just scandalous all around how, you're fighting within your own country and then that's how you're treating them.
Yeah.
But in general, well, not in general, but okay, so the total number of blacks that fought in the Civil War was about 190,000. And it's recorded so far that 30,000 of them died and more than half of them unidentified. Now, the total amount that died out of blacks and whites is pretty much like 300,000.
Wow.
And 54% of those bodies have been classified as unknown. So
that's a lot.
That's a lot of
people.
Yes. Yeah. So, for example, one thing I came across, Jefferson Barracks Cemetery in St. Louis contains 564 mass graves still to this day.
God.
I was like, how many?
564
mass graves. And I mean, I don't know how many bodies make mass. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know if it's 10 bodies or, you know what I mean? But it says that there's more than 3,000 unknown soldiers from the Civil War at that particular cemetery.
I'd be mad as hell. I fought in the Civil War, and my name ain't even on.
That's the thing.
Plaque,
yeah, it's unfortunate, and I mean, you can just think about all the people that have died just throughout the years that are
in war period,
just lost. Yeah. But I also saw like the way that these bodies are coming to light is like, say one story was a treasure hunter with a metal detector discovered the remains of 19 Black Union soldiers on Folly Island in South Carolina in 1987. So then they were able to go get those bodies and bury them, honorably in a veteran cemetery. Yeah. So it's like over the years, that's how these bodies have been getting moved.
They kind of just been discovering them when they
pretty
discover
much,
them.
Yeah. And I mean, even like recently, I saw like maybe 2 years ago, like it's like people, like developers will be digging up a parking lot or something, Yeah, and it's like, oh, shit, like there's 30 people under here. Yeah, so. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting.
You never know if your house is built on top of.
For sure, right? So I got a question. How did, on both sides, like maybe, how did Black people get involved? Involved in a war period? Like, obviously they were slaves, so some of them might have wanted to fight, but,
Yeah, still, like, what was the process?
Yeah, what was the process?
Because, we're just given a very simple, watered down version of how everything happened. Nice, neat little package.
Yeah.
So, pretty much from what I gathered, the way that it kind of started was that, Southerners, they were setting up their forts, their military forts in the South using slave labor, of course. And the Union Army people, they needed to set up their forts as well. And they didn't necessarily have slaves at this point in time. This is like 1861 when the war was starting. Slavery really wasn't practiced that much in the North anymore at this point. So what they would do, that doesn't mean that they were treating, Black people well, though. So what they would do is pretty much threaten Black people to work for them, to build these forts for them, and promise that they would pay them, of course, without actually paying, or they would pay them like, just teeny tiny amount. And after they finished building these forts, many of the slaves ended up joining the Union side of the war. Just in hopes of getting away, or, you know what I mean? Just to be able to show some sort of patriotism, which may, a lot towards their freedom, just any way that they can find an escape route, they're going to take it.
Yeah, they're finessing. They were just finessing their way to freedom. So any loophole they can jump through to get some sort of freedom, they would.
Yes, and them jumping through that loophole ultimately would start to lead towards the emancipation of, slavery altogether, them, finessing their way through the cracks.
Yeah.
So, like, what we would need to talk about, though, for all this to make sense is how the Civil War even started. Okay. So, from my research, slavery died down in the North by 1805. Okay, the Civil War began in 1861.
Pause.
Hmm.
Because one of the things that we need to make sure we highlight is that a lot of people just view slavery as a South thing.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like, especially with the Civil War. They just view slavery as only happened in the South. There was slavery all over the place. The South just took it to another level.
Oh, the Northerners were the originators. Like, I didn't even get that deep into it, but that's why they have the remains of slaves underneath the World Trade Center, they discovered. Yeah, so it's like slavery was practiced so heavy up in the New York region, like, and that's why they're like, and it's funny too, because you know how... like New York is a melting pot, but you know how they always still talk about how the treatment of blacks are, in New York are, very discriminatory. And it's like, that's just ingrained in New York. It was built off of slave labor.
Yeah.
And
country period.
Exactly. But yeah, they really don't talk about as much in history, how many slaves were up north, far up north, really being used. But anyway, because I couldn't even like get into that because that was a whole nother thing. I was like, whoa, okay, research that for another day. But so what I was saying is, so slavery died down in the North by 1805, and the Civil War began in 1861. So this is 60 years pretty much of the South still holding on to slave capital.
Clearly, if they're still doing reenactments, they're holding on to a lot of things.
Right. So I was like, pretty much from what I gathered, I guess, slave inflation happens over time.
Shut up.
With greedy, people in charge. So in the 1850s, okay, so remember, Civil War started in 1861. So in the 1850s, large plantation owners in the South destroyed the small farmers because they owned most of the slaves.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if the price went up on slaves and stop laughing.
It sounds horrible.
I know.
It was so far removed.
It's like the weight. Yeah, it's like the weight.
Yeah.
It's like, what? So yeah, like regular common people at this point weren't really able to afford slaves. So it's like your everyday Joe didn't have slaves anymore at this point. So
how unfortunate.
Yeah, so sad.
Right.
So I look at this as like pretty much the same way that these large corporations do in present day. You buy out all the smaller guys to hoard all the resources.
Yeah, you kill the mom and pops.
Right. So these smaller farmers, at the same time, they weren't living as luxuriously as them. They ended up having to look towards them for like loans because the banking system wasn't like really fully set up in the South at this point. So they would get loans from these large plantations. They would go to them for materials and supplies, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So you know what I mean? So it's like they have these few big...
Yeah, they're like the Walmart of... It's like when Walmart comes into town. You know what I mean?
Exactly. So, stop saying but... But the poor whites and small farmers still accepted the political leadership of the planter elite because they looked up to them in hopes that they too would own slaves someday.
The American dream.
Yes. One day
I'm gonna own me a human.
Right. Like what? That's what you're aspiring to do?
Yeah.
Okay. So the principle of white supremacy was accepted by almost all white Southerners of all classes, and to make slavery seem legitimate, natural, and essential for a civilized society. So they just kept, turning the blind eye. It's okay, because this is, how it needs to be. But also, what makes a lot of sense too is why they were all so unified in that what the fuck? Ideology. There we go. Ideologically.
Good girl.
Okay. I'm like, wait a minute now. What word is that? Okay. That ideology. There we go.
Yeah.
There was no secret ballot voting at the time in the U.S. until the 1880s. So even if a person wanted to vote against the wishes of the establishment, they feared that they would be publicly ostracized.
Wow.
So yeah, all your business was out in the street about how you felt. So.
And even I find it's funny how like even all classes. So the poor people who were getting the short end of the stick, they're still voting to keep the establishment in power, even if it's to their own detriment. you know.
Trump.
Trump.
You know, I mean, we see that still in present day.
Yeah, of course.
They all want to try to stick together when it's like, anyway, moving on. Okay, so before the Civil War, not right before, but before the Civil War started, I want to say maybe this argument was going on, I guess, like 10 years prior. So throughout the 1850s, there was a huge argument going on between the North and the South for the Southerners to have the right to take their slaves westward towards Louisiana, Texas, etc.
Expansion.
Right. Westward expansion, as we know about it in our textbooks. But the pretty much the North was like, no, like, you guys keep your slaves to the coast. I don't know if, I didn't look into this more, but I don't know if they were saying no because those parts of North America were already colonized by the Spanish. And then there's Mexico, too, that had Texas already. So I don't know if maybe they didn't want to start no more shit immediately.
Well, I think it's like a lot of moving parts, you know.
Yeah.
Because it could be economic based as well. You know, you start expanding, and you get enough money, we ain't going to be able to tell you nothing.
Right. So this was all, you know, this was pretty much when Lincoln was getting elected. That was his argument, pretty much was against what the Southern states wanted, and that got him elected without any of the Southern votes. So the Southerners felt like, you know, that was a slap to the face, and, you know, nobody's listening to them at all. So that's why they decided that, you know, they were going to do their own thing. And they wanted to try to assert their authority over the federal government so that they could abolish federal laws that they don't support. You know, especially laws that interfered with their right to keep the slaves and take them wherever they wanted. You know, they want to do what they want with their slaves. So the North already had military forts, you know, up and down the coast because we were just one at this point. So the way that it all got, you know, on and popping was pretty much somebody in the South, I don't remember who it was, attacked one of the forts, one of the Union-owned forts. Yeah, and that pretty much started the Civil War. Like, I don't know if they were just running over drunk with their horse and threw a Molotov, like. And yeah, the Civil War started in April 1861, all because they were salty.
Yeah.
Because they couldn't take their, like, just stay here with your damn slaves and be happy here. God dang, like.
Nah, I mean, that's the American way to grow. There has to be growth every year. Like, you know what I mean? It's greed. And you can assume that the slaves built some of these forts as well.
Yeah, they built all of the stuff. Like, that's pretty much like, everything. So, yes, we can go, so now we can wind forward, because I just went back, so now we can go forward back to when the war started. Let's see. So, pretty much throughout 1861, which is the beginning of the war, into 1862, many Southern slaves would escape to the Union forts in hopes of being able to fight against the Confederates. So, once the war, it started up, and then, the Union's moving down, whatever, vice versa. They're, everybody's moving around. They're setting up these different forts. The Southern slaves were hoping, let me try to escape over to them and prove that, I can be
useful.
Exactly. I can be of use to them in some way, and they'll, take me on. Because free men in the North, they still were not allowed to enlist technically in the war at this point, because there was a law in effect saying that blacks couldn't enlist into the military. But I guess after they saw how useful the Southern blacks were, to them, the ones that were sneaking over, they lifted the ban and allowed them to officially enlist. They lifted that ban in 1862, and they would only allow the Southern blacks in if their masters were Confederate. So it's like, hold on, where you come from? All right, you a Southern black? All right,
I think it was kind of like a vetting system. It's like, it's safe to assume that if your master was a Confederate, you want to fight against the Confederates.
Right. But I'm how would you even know if they telling the truth?
Yeah, that's just...
Everybody, I'm like, yup.
Yup.
Down there, Alabama.
Yeah, he was a jerk. He was a real jerk.
Just say some common ass name. Yeah, Thomas.
that's an example of how illogical like prejudice is.
Right.
Because it's just like you just threw this in with like a stipulation that you had no way that you can prove.
Exactly. How you gonna prove that? Okay. So Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation came 1 year after they lifted the ban to allow the blacks to finally start enlisting. That came 1 year after in 1863 to quote unquote free all slaves. Now, this isn't as genuine as it's always been described to us.
Okay.
There's a little bit of cheekiness behind it because it was it was pretty cheekiness. It was pretty much a military strategic move. Whereas, okay, you want to fight over not being able to move slaves westward, then how about I set them all free so you don't have nothing? Like, and then they all can come up here and fight with us. Like, that's pretty much what it was about. It really wasn't with us in mind for our benefit. It was really just to do another jab at them.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Because they wouldn't secede.
Move,
like they wouldn't secede. So it's just like, all right, fine. You won't even have any slaves anymore. How about that? So on the side note, though, that I thought was really, I don't know how to feel about this. Well, I guess I kind of do, but it's like you can see so many different sides with this. In lieu of the upcoming emancipation in 1862, Lincoln worked on urging African Americans to consider immigrating abroad to escape the prejudice that they encountered here, but also to get as many of the free Black Americans away from their oppressor in fear of what a free Black man would mean for this country. So I was looking, and I didn't dive too far into it because that's a whole nother thing. But there has been a recolonization effort of former slaves in this country between like the 1800s to the 1860s. Wow. And, hence the Panama Canal. That was one area they focused on of pretty much shipping former slaves down there to build a canal and just pretty much live there. And they also, like, there's Liberia that they set up where they took a group of former slaves here and just basically recolonized, kicked out the native Liberians and just dumped some,
some more.
Yeah, dumped some Black people here. And they had plans on doing a recolonization effort in a part of Haiti, but it went terribly wrong because they had got funding from the government, they had supplies and everything, and I guess some illness broke out on the ship, so only about I think they were trying to do a total of 5,000 people shipped out of here to Haiti, but they were only able to do 450 because by the time that was going on, all the funding kind of dispersed after the war. But yeah, it's crazy. And I think they also had I don't know if Louisiana was part of the United States at this point. I don't know, but I saw something too saying something about dropping, a group of Blacks down there too. So it was they were trying to, it's all right, so slavery's over. All right, let's get rid of them.
Yeah.
In fear, in fear that we were just going to all out,
Well, I think, it could be multiple reasons, but,
because he was trying to come from the viewpoint of, they're not going to treat you good here.
What happens now? You opened up this Pandora's box of slavery, and now it's over, and no real good can happen for Black people. Right. How does this get resolved?
Right.
Right. And I don't think it does.
Exactly. So, all right. So once the Emancipation Proclamation was signed, ex-slaves, now we can call them ex-slaves, I suppose. I mean, even though the proclamation is an announcement, it's not a law. It's just saying it, you know what I mean? It's just making an announcement. So, all you got to say, motherfucker, all you had to say was a word. So they started fleeing the Confederacy. Niggas was out. They out. So, any way they could. And I'm sure this is ties into the Underground Railroad as well. But Congress's order still didn't require Northerners to welcome every ex-slave who came knocking. That still didn't mean that you had to treat them respectfully or change your viewpoint. You know what I'm saying? There's always still that gray area, remember, in the transition.
I forgot the date, but they're only 60 years removed from having slaves themselves.
Exactly. So, yeah, it's just like the other day. Yeah. And there was still prejudice and all that type of stuff, too. So stuff that's still going on today, but okay. So, so some of the Northern soldiers would exploit the ex-slaves. Some of them would just kill them on sight. And some even profited off illegal trade on the black market to the enemy. So some of them would sell them back.
Ship them right back.
Sell them back to the Confederates. So it was still just risky. Like, just imagining just living through that is just...
you can't even fathom it. You can't even fathom it. Exactly. Like, you can't trust nobody. Like,
nope. But, still the slaves of the South continued to volunteer to fight, because they were determined to taste even a watered down version of freedom until the real thing came along. Any little bit, it was like, fuck
closer, any step closer we can get to freedom, we're going to take it, no matter what that means.
Right.
Like, yeah.
Right. And it was like some of them really enjoyed being able to fight against their previous slave masters. But it's like, it's still alongside their ancestors' previous slave masters. So it's messy.
Yeah.
It's messy, We always have to turn a blind eye. We always have to turn
That's
a blind eye.
True. That's very true.
But, so with the Emancipation Proclamation, it authorized the recruitment of free slaves and free blacks as Union soldiers. So during the next 2.5 years after this was signed, so it was signed in 1863. So over the next 2 years, with all the blacks joining, just the North outnumbered the South very heavily. And by May 1863, the Bureau of Colored Troops was established to manage the black enlistees, because there were so many. So they had to set up, some sort of program to have it organized and, keep track of all that stuff. And recruitment was low until active efforts were made to enlist black volunteers. So I guess that's how they really got those numbers up. And they were saying one of the volunteers was Frederick Douglass, who helped encourage free black men to volunteer as a way to ensure eventual full citizenship. He was like, this is something you guys have to participate in, in hopes of,
Side note. I don't know if you've ever read it, but the biography of Frederick Douglass is such an important read, and it seems like his name keeps coming up in this.
I know.
So no, it's such an important read. So
I think I had to read it in class before, but we read like just an excerpt, and I don't even remember. I think that was when I went to a black school, but for that 1 year. But but no, definitely want to check that out again. But so blacks in the war, they served, of course, as relief. Served as relief roles, working as nurses, cooks, blacksmiths. The South refused to arm blacks. They were not letting their slaves join because they were in fear of a slave rebellion. But they did use them to help, build their fortifications and perform the camp duties. So there were slaves still on the battlefield, but they were still tending to their master. Or they would have the job of, like, if their master was killed, they would have the job of making sure that the body would get back to his family. You know what I'm saying? But
I wonder, what happens when, like, say you're a Union soldier fighting against the Confederates, and you just run into a Confederate slave, a black slave. Like, what type of interaction did that cause? Like,
Yeah. Did they just let them go on by? Or I don't know. Yeah. But then in the beginning, many Northern officers refused to believe that black troops would fight when it came time. So they were often assigned non-combat duties, or they were placed in the rear guarding railroads and bridges. But one essential part that blacks did play, was as spies and scouts to the Union Army. So they were able to provide valuable information about Confederate forces, their plans, and familiar terrain. Like, they know that. They know the South, right?
I know this field like the back of my hand.
I'm done with you. Oh yeah, it's my hood. It's my old hood.
Hey, you gonna make a left?
Yes, they know exactly where to go.
Go around the corner like 2 songs. You gonna go for like 2 songs.
2 songs. I hate you. But information gathered from black sources were so numerous and valuable that they were put into a special category. So that category, they were called the Black Dispatches. So, so escaped slaves, many of them whom fled to the Union lines, were carefully debriefed, and some were recruited as spies. when they would return to the slave territory, they would with white agents posing as their masters. So they would, be little undercovers. They go back down there to see what the hell they was down there planning and stuff.
That's very interesting. That's like Django.
Right? Oh my God, I didn't even think of that.
Yeah,
I need to watch that movie again. Django. Yo. Look at that. Look at that, huh? That's where they got it from. Connections. But freed blacks, including Mother Harriet Tubman, were also spies. Harriet Tubman led a raid in South Carolina in 1863. So she was up in that joint early. I was like, yo, we don't never hear about a thug Mrs. Harriet.
Right. We always they always describe her as somebody who's just sneaking through these underground railroads.
That's it. She was telling she was getting gangster on him, showing her that little scarf. Like, come on, yo. Like, I heard about, so my sister showed me this one podcast where they're going in depth about Harriet's history that most people don't know about. And pretty much they said that she would be threatening to bust a cap in anyone's ass that she was trying to save, and that would slow her down. So if she had a group of people she was trying to lead along the railroad and they all of a sudden want to get scary and she would kill them.
Yeah, because you couldn't risk them going back and giving up.
Yeah, exactly. She couldn't risk it. So I was like, damn, okay. But what I thought was funny too, along the lines with this, is General Robert E. Lee wrote, "The chief source of information to our enemy is through our Negroes. Like, our niggas running, telling all our business."
Yup, I'm telling.
Yup. Soon as they get up there, they was down there doing this. Right. They was down there doing that. Or I'll tell you anything you want to know.
Right. Anything. Straight up, just to get closer to freedom, man.
Hell yeah, I'm telling all of it.
Snitching. There was no snitch. There was snitching back then. There was no such thing as no snitching, son.
Nah, not against the enemy.
Hell no.
Fuck y'all. But so the black regimes at this point, towards the end of the war ended in 1865. So towards the end, the black regimes fighting for the Union were so successful that the Confederates finally began considering arming slaves late in the war.
2 months before the war was over.
Mad late.
Right.
Yeah. So I saw that on March 13th, 1865. Okay, March 1865. The war ended in May 1865. The Southern legislation finally passed, a bill or whatever that would free black slaves if they enlisted in the Confederate Army, although they had to have consent from their masters. So they still had to get permission. So they only got about 50 ex-slaves because ain't nobody letting go of their slaves. They
not the strong ones. Who are these 50? No, not the strong ones. Who are these 50 people?
The strong ones.
But think about it. Who were these 50 people that were allowed to? They were probably the people that they didn't care. They didn't care for the person that didn't pick as much cotton. He can go.
Yeah, and it was such a long, tedious process, and of course the stubbornness of the Southerners. They didn't even get a chance to fight because by the time they were still in training when the war ended.
Yeah, talk about racism. If you're really your ideology is so thick.
Yes.
That it got in the way of your own initiative.
Mm-hmm. Nope.
That's crazy.
Yes.
That's crazy.
Ridiculous. So, as I said before, the Civil War ended in May 1865. Mm-hmm. And another thing that I thought about was Juneteenth, because I was like, June 19th, aka my birthday.
Hey.
June 19th is after, I was wondering if there's any connection, so I Googled it, and of course there's connection. Damn, I should know this stuff. My God.
Don't blame yourself though. Think about all the research we had to do to get to it.
I know.
You know what I'm saying?
Damn, so pretty much on June 19th in 1865, so that's a month after the war ended, and it's also known as Juneteenth, it was announced in Galveston, Texas, which is also, the most recent school shooting happened at Santa Fe High School was in Galveston County.
Wow.
Which was very sad correlation that I found. God bless them. But it was announced that slavery had ended. Mm-hmm. So a general, I should have put his name down, but a general rode out there, and just announced it. Like, I don't know if he just announced it to the center square of 10 people. I don't know who he announced it to, but pretty much throughout the war, Texas was not as closely monitored as other battle states. So for this reason, many slave owners went to Texas with their slaves, being hard-headed. Mm. That was what they wanted to do initially. So while, we over here fighting, they snuck right on off. Oh, y'all ain't
set
looking.
Up shop elsewhere.
Y'all ain't looking. They tiptoeing right over there. And then too, like a lot of them were setting up down in Louisiana and a place like that too. But kind of like the fighting was kind of spreading out that way. So they would have to kind of like flee the Union soldiers. So that's why they kept running out west. So since they ran away from Union presence, slavery continued in Texas way longer than it should have, because it didn't just end with the announcement that general made. I mean, the slave masters still had to tell the slaves that they were free. Why the fuck would they do that?
Hell no.
Like, why would they do that? And it's not like they had radios and stuff like that back then, so they didn't know. They had no idea that, slavery was abolished. Well, at that time it wasn't abolished yet, but soon after it would be abolished. But the June 19th date is celebrated because that was the day of the initial announcement. Yeah, Texas. So people, right. So that Juneteenth celebration started in Texas. And now just all over, people just celebrate it. You know what I'm saying? I think, honestly, they may celebrate it because we didn't know about Memorial Day, that we started that either. So I think the Juneteenth had been widely known, before. So I think we kind of just took on that date as the ending of slavery. But pretty much I'm going to end it with this whole story, the Civil War story. So the war ended in May. It was announced in Texas in June. So Emancipation Proclamation pretty much just decriminalized slavery. Like I said, it was just an announcement. It still ain't law. It's just decriminalized, like weed. It's just decriminalized.
I think they was leaving wiggle room. Like, they wanted to leave a little wiggle room.
Oh, I said just like weed. Like, they decriminalized it, but your ass can still get locked up for it.
Yeah.
So the 13th Amendment didn't come along till the end of the year in December. So 7 months after the war ended, then there was finally a law that prohibited slavery. But like I said before, that still doesn't mean that everybody knew about it. Mm-hmm. And, at the end of the day, the only way the North could win is pretty much by freeing the slaves. So it was like, because they got so involved with everything. So, we really have to be thankful that they slipped through those cracks and found a way to infiltrate their system and found a way to be helpful to the opposite side. Whereas, they didn't have a choice but to free us. But yeah, I had no idea how the Civil War was connected to the emancipation, of slaves and how that whole story went about. This is a very, very, very broken down version because we've already been talking for almost an hour. So this is super duper broken down. So, but there's tons of information online if you really want to just read those individual stories of the different Black troops and the different infantries and, the different battles that they fought. Mm-hmm. And there's also, a ton of different stories about just individuals, and then just not even I didn't even want to, the mass graves. That's a lot. If you want to read more about that too, there's plenty of information because the dead were littered all throughout. You're away from your home. The dead were littered all throughout. So it's like,
they're all over the place.
Yeah, it's all over the place.
And yeah.
But yeah, that's bullshit ass American history, yo. Didn't learn any of this.
None whatsoever.
We learned it in bits and pieces. They didn't tell us the connections, like how it all went together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
you know what I'm saying?
For sure.
But if you do what was really so from knowing all this, if you want to visit, one of the earliest known sites of where slaves who fought, for their and our freedom were buried, if you want to visit a place like that, you can just find a United States Colored Troops section in the Veteran Army, and that's what they were called, the United States.
The Veteran Army or some?
No, there's no in a Veterans Army. There.
Okay,
I mean, did I say Army? Cemetery.
Cemetery, yeah.
I'm sorry. In the Veterans Cemetery. They're all throughout the country. They've had to establish these cemeteries for these bodies. So that's when they started the, I don't remember the year. It was maybe 10 or 20 years after the Civil War. They started establishing all these different veterans veteran American cemeteries all over the country to place these bodies. So that's why I was saying, like, these people, they can be, in Tennessee, but they were from New York, It's just, that's where their body was found, and they just put them there. And a lot of them, too, like we said, are unknown. But I found that there was one actually down the street from my house.
Weird.
I was like, really? Okay. Had no idea. So I went this morning to go visit because, why not? Like, especially after doing all this research, like, I know exactly where, these former slaves were buried that took this, courageous journey, to fight towards the freedom of all of us. So I went, and if you guys have been to Philly, it's just like mad hood, and all of a sudden it's nice. Like, I'm driving straight up through the hood. Like, I'm chilling. I'm like thinking I'm going to come across it like head on, like it's going to be in front of me. So I'm driving, whatever, passing all these raggedy row houses. So all of a sudden, it's just like, bam, on my left side, like just like a row of just all these white headstones. Like, I jumped. I was like, oh, I wasn't ready. Like, it was just it's overwhelming because it was so many, gravestones. It was so many there.
And that's not even like a percentage. That's absolutely
and this is one
nothing.
of the small ones. This one isn't even like really listed on the national like registry. I just ended up finding this one through an article that somebody wrote in like a Philadelphia newspaper. That's the only reason I found out about this one, because it's not really on, on the scale, I guess, to even be considered. But they have at least 300 Civil War troops. Colored troops in that particular cemetery. So I went there, and it's a pretty gloomy day. I'm just like, fits the mood.
Right.
So I go in there. I looked previously on the map, so I knew the section. So actually, the section was like really close to the entrance. I thought I would have to walk a little ways.
What section? What section?
It was section C. Like, they have different sections labeled throughout the cemetery, so that where to go, what you're looking for particularly, I guess. And
what were you looking for? What made you go to section C? So pretty much
section C was where the Civil War United States colored troops were buried.
Okay, so it's not just for the Civil War, it's any war. Is that what you're saying? Okay.
Yeah, because they had there's also, but they also have a section for the Confederate soldiers that were, I guess, in this area. So they have that section too, where they're buried. Then they have a section of where people that died after. So the section that I was talking about, section C, that's the people that died in the war. Okay. So then there was another section, section G. Those are people that served in the war, but they didn't die in the war. They served in the United States colored troops, but they still were alive. So they
survived the war, but
so they died like 1890 or something. And so on some of their gravestones, they still had the United States colored troop emblem. But so it was cool that I could see it. So I know, like, for instance, I saw some arguments, like, for instance, the Arlington Cemetery, they had a segregated part where they would bury all the blacks, into the back of, the back section or something like that. And they would argue about that, and I'm like, but I kind of like to know where specifically I can find, you know what I mean? So that's why I'm like, I get that you want to integrate, but it made it so much easier for me to just go and be in that one section. You know what I'm saying?
Cool. I don't really I have no desire to visit the Confederate graves.
Exactly. So
I want to know where they are.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
I can avoid them.
Exactly. Look, so
right? So I can spray paint on the tombs, like.
I mean, in the cemetery, they also had, a bunch of Union soldiers too, but there was one Confederate section. So as soon as I got up to the section C, to the troops that died in the war, the colored troops that died in the war, the sun started shining. I was like, okay, like, dang, clouds, all right, beaming, yes. So I sat there while I was walking through, and it's kind of like creepy walking through, because it's like, I'm stepping right on top. Sometimes you walk and you feel like the ground digging a little bit. It's like,
somebody gonna grab your ankle.
Right? But so many of those, like, grave markers were just so worn away. Like, you could tell it was from the 1800s. Like, you couldn't even read what was on there. But a lot of them looked like they had been, like, redone. I don't know if maybe it's, like, family, or maybe there's some sort of, like, associations that go through, and once they finally discover the ID, they go through and you know what I mean? Get a new grave marker made. But some of them were so worn down, or some of them just had nothing on it at all, just a marker, because you don't know who it is. But yeah, so I walked around and I was looking at the other section, Section G, which had the people that served in the colored troops, but they still lived on. And when they, passed, they were later laid to rest there. So I turned to the left. All of a sudden, I'm not even kidding you. Like, I walked to the section and all of a sudden the clouds started coming back in. Like, it started getting gloomy. It started getting gloomy again. And I didn't even pay attention to it. I was just like, ooh, some shade. So I didn't even pay attention to it. So all of a sudden I turn and, they have these little plaque stands with information about like the sections. So I see this one and it's like, it's all gray at this point. So I see this one, it's covered in flies. I was like, what the fuck? So I step up a little closer. It's talking about the Confederate section. I was like, this cannot be real right now. Like, it was literally crawling with flies. Like, I have a video of it that I can put up. It was covered in flies, all these flies flying above it. I'm like, did someone smear shit on this? Like, why is like, everything else was so nice in the cemetery. As soon as you get to that section, it's like there are flies flying all around it. All of a sudden, it got all like the sun went away. It was like, yeah. And it was like, I felt like my ancestors were telling me, like, better not. Don't even
read it. Don't even read it.
Dare step a foot on that ground. Like, I took a step back. I was like,
nope.
All right. I ain't gonna go over there, y'all. I ain't gonna go over there. We good.
The ancestral plains.
They was like, you better not. I was like, yeah, I'm good. But it was a good amount over there. Like, I think it's like close to 200 Confederates.
Yeah, I saw the pictures you sent me, man.
Yeah.
It makes me want to go. I might have to make a trip out there.
Or maybe see if there's even one in your area. There may be. They're all over.
Oh, I'm pretty sure New Jersey is pretty much monumental in war and stuff like that. So there's stuff all over the place. There's a whole bunch of bunkers and all this stuff over here,
Right.
Yeah, that's very interesting.
Yeah, so we can have a little patriotism.
Actually
feel it a little bit, I guess. Yeah.
So what did you get from, like, if you can speak on, like, what did you get from doing all this research and diving into this?
Well, like I was just saying, I can now feel a little bit of patriotism. I never felt any patriotism for this country, really. But I can feel it through them. You know what I mean? And what they stood for. I have no problem rallying behind that. So, especially now with Memorial Day, I'm just glad I have a better sense of what it actually means and what happened.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? I'm not just like, okay, we doing cookouts to remember what? I don't know. I knew like some of my family members, they would, I know a lot of people go to visit, deceased relatives. Grave, yeah. So I always kind of thought that's what it meant. And I mean, of course it can still mean that, but I never really truly knew because then I never really truly knew what it actually meant. So glad that I know now. And hopefully you guys are glad too if you didn't know some of this information.
I think what I pull from it, like, most is like, if we take it back to that event that they had in Charleston and just Black involvement and that kind of just not being in the general education that I received. Mm-hmm. It's just another example of just selective history and just controlling a narrative. Right. And, even John Brown, he has his historical site. And I wonder if he was a Black guy, would he have been left out of history too? I don't know if I learned about John Brown when I was in school. So it's like, if our contributions are continually left out, how could we ever develop that patriotism? Like, how can we ever look at this country in the same way?
Exactly.
As our white counterparts that are the ultimate patriotisms, and it's like, maybe if we just had more examples of contributions of this nature, we'd have more pride. And I'd also like to note that, like, one of the things that spawned it, we were talking about, we saw Black people invented Memorial Day. Clearly, like, kind of in going through the history of it, there's so many moving parts. It's not so much like, I don't want to dwell on like so much, hey, we invented it, because that would assume that there wasn't a John Brown. Mm-hmm. That would assume that there wasn't other people in history that came together and did certain things,
Right.
So it's really just acknowledging contributions.
Yes.
Like, you can't just willfully leave stuff out and then just assume we're going to have the same type of viewpoint as you. Information, if you give us information, maybe as we sort out our own history, like, we can finally figure out our place in this, other than, you know what I mean, just slavery. You know what I'm saying?
Hell yeah.
Nah, man. This was a very interesting topic.
Yes.
Very deep.
Yes.
And you did your groundwork, man. You went to the cemetery and all that. You know what I'm saying?
I want to get firsthand experience.
You know
I was
what I mean?
in this. I had my little stones, my selenite to protect me. I was like, I'm not.
All right, you picking up no spirits here.
I only want to see who I want to see. I don't want none of y'all others. It's like, no. But yeah, very eye-opening. Now my eyes are open everywhere. Like, well, what else?
Yeah, what else have I just been walking by? You said, how far was the place from you?
10 minutes, if that. I drive by it all the time. I've driven by this. I don't even know how many times. And I wanted to, like, when I was leaving, I saw this older couple walking into there, and I was like, darn, I kind of wish that they were in there so I could have, talked to them.
Yeah.
Because maybe they might have, had some information, but I can always go back again. And I definitely got to teach my son this stuff, so.
Yeah, for real. I really hope you guys got something from this, or just learned a little bit of something, because I know I did, and I know you
Memorial Day's more than barbecues and wearing all white.
But
it's still gonna be there.
Yeah, it's still gonna be barbecues, wearing all white. You know what I mean? But when you biting into that banging ass chicken,
keep in mind.
Keep in mind.
Yes, those fallen soldiers that gave their lives for us.
Yeah, for sure. Appreciate it.
Yes, thank you for listening.
Thank you guys. You guys are awesome.
Bye. Have a good holiday. Peace.
Yeah. Peace.